He sang for presidents and dazzled Vegas. Yet Sammy Davis Jr. died drowning in debt. Barbara Payton once lit red carpets, only to sell herself on the streets. And Judy Garland, America's sweetheart, couldn't even pay her hotel bill near her end. These are 17 glittering stars whose massive empires crumbled into dust, who lost everything and died broke and alone. Number 1. Sammy Davis Jr. Rat Pack legend, crushed by the IRS. The spotlight adored him. Sammy Davis Jr. could sing, dance, and command a stage with a presence so magnetic that even presidents asked for encores. As the only black member of the Rat Pack, alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, he became a symbol of showbiz sophistication during the 1950s and 1960s. From sold-out concerts in Las Vegas to film roles in Ocean's 11 and Porgy and Bess, Davis embodied glamour and wealth. But beneath the tailored tuxedos and dazzling smile, a darker reality was slowly draining his fortune. Years of indulgence in luxury homes, fast cars, and jewelry left him financially exposed. Gambling debts piled up, and every paycheck seemed to vanish as quickly as it arrived. Even worse, the IRS discovered years of unpaid taxes and mounting penalties. By the 1980s, Davis's tax bill ballooned to more than $7 million, an astronomical sum that devoured everything he owned. To settle even a fraction of it, he liquidated nearly all his assets, from homes to prized memorabilia, yet the debts lingered. The cruelest irony was that Davis never stopped working. Even as throat cancer advanced and his health failed, he kept performing, flying across the country in an exhausting effort to pay down the insurmountable tax burden. Friends recalled him joking with audiences, but behind the curtain he grew visibly thinner, his voice weakened by illness and stress. When he passed away on May 16, 1990, at just 64 years old, Davis left behind an estate that was still $5.2 million in debt. The man who once embodied the height of mid-century entertainment, who danced with presidents and charmed millions, had nothing left to give his family but unpaid bills. It was Sinatra, his Rat Pack brother, who helped cover the funeral costs. A final gesture of loyalty. Sammy Davis Jr.'s story is one of dazzling talent and tragic irony. A man whose energy seemed infinite, but whose fortune proved fragile in the face of mismanagement, indulgence, and an unforgiving tax system. Number 2. Barbara Payton. From red carpets to the streets. The flashbulbs once adored Barbara Payton. With her platinum hair, piercing eyes, and undeniable charisma, she seemed destined for stardom in the early 1950s. Studios promoted her as Hollywood's next great blonde sensation, pairing her with James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, 1950. For a moment, her name glittered on marquees and gossip columns alike, the picture of promise in an industry built on glamour. But Barbara's life unraveled almost as quickly as it ascended. Behind the smiles on the red carpet, she wrestled with a volatile temper, turbulent relationships, and a taste for late-night excess. Hollywood's studio system thrived on carefully crafted images, and Payton's scandals soon became more famous than her performances. Affairs with actors like Franchot Tone and Tom Neal escalated into violent confrontations, splashed across headlines, eroding her once bright reputation. As casting directors turned away, Barbara leaned harder into nightlife, alcohol, and eventually drugs. Arrests for public drunkenness and bad checks became routine. Each mugshot served as a haunting contrast to the glamorous portraits of her earlier career. By her early 30s, offers had dried up entirely. The young starlet who once walked arm in arm with Cagney was reduced to hustling for survival on the very streets where she had once been adored. Her decline was brutal. Payton turned to prostitution in Los Angeles to fund her addictions. An open secret whispered in the same industry that had once celebrated her beauty. Once invited to lavish premieres, she now begged friends for small loans. In her final years, her body bore the marks of heavy drinking, malnutrition, and constant abuse. On May 8, 1967, at just 39 years old, Barbara Payton died of heart and liver failure at her parents' modest San Diego home. She had no money for a proper funeral. Her body was quietly cremated, her once famous name already fading from public memory. Number 3. Judy Garland, the voice that couldn't pay the bills. She was America's sweetheart, the girl who followed the yellow brick road and gave the world over the rainbow. Judy Garland's voice could stop time, her presence a beacon of hope during Hollywood's golden age. Yet, behind the curtain, the woman who had earned an estimated $40 million over her career was fighting not only her personal demons, but also a crushing financial collapse that would leave her nearly destitute. The seeds of her downfall were planted early. As a teenager under contract at MGM, Judy was placed on dangerous cycles of pep pills and sleeping tablets to control her weight and keep her working. The chemical dependency grew into lifelong addiction, draining both her health and her bank account. Costly hospital stays, repeated relapses, and dependency on prescription drugs swallowed her wealth. But addiction was only one wound. Judy suffered from disastrous marriages and financial exploitation. Her third husband, Sid Luft, mismanaged and allegedly squandered large portions of her earnings on failed ventures. Agents and advisors took their share as well, while the IRS loomed with unpaid tax bills that reached into the millions. By the 1960s, the woman once billed as Hollywood's greatest starlet was fleeing hotel bills and relying on friends for small loans. To survive, Judy turned to the only thing she had left: her voice. She performed in small clubs and cabarets, sometimes for meager fees. Her once mighty talent reduced to keeping creditors at bay. Audiences still adored her, but the desperation was plain, a legend working simply to settle debts. On June 22, 1969, Judy Garland died in London at just 47 years old. Her estate was valued at around $40,000, a heartbreaking contrast to the fortune she had once commanded. The IRS, meanwhile, claimed more than $4 million in debts. Garland's story is one of cruel irony. The woman who had given hope to millions through her music and films left the world burdened by despair and poverty. Hollywood had sold her as the perfect dream, but in reality, she lived and died as one of its most tragic victims. Number 4. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who lost it. All few actors embodied adventure like Errol Flynn. With his roguish grin, chiseled features, and athletic grace, he became the definitive Hollywood swashbuckler of the 1930s and 1940s. From Captain Blood, 1935, to The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, Flynn dazzled audiences with swordplay and charm. On screen, he was immortalized as the dashing hero. Off-screen, he lived as though the fantasy were real, and it cost him everything. Flynn's earnings were immense by the standards of his era, but his appetite for excess was even greater. He purchased yachts, sprawling estates, and threw parties that became legend in Hollywood gossip columns. Women, drink, and gambling were constant companions, each leaving their mark on his fortune. The press painted him as the ultimate playboy, but the debts piling beneath the image told a different story. The actor's personal life was just as tumultuous. Multiple divorces drained his accounts through large settlements. His 1943 trial on statutory rape charges, though he was acquitted, saddled him with enormous legal fees and permanently tainted his public reputation. His credibility with studios suffered, and offers began to decline. Flynn also poured money into risky projects, including an ambitious independent production company and film ventures that collapsed before release. When financiers pulled out, he was left holding debts he could not repay. By the late 1950s, the man who once epitomized box office glory was appearing in low-budget European films, his health eroded by alcoholism and years of hard living. On October 14, 1959, Errol Flynn died of a heart attack in Vancouver at only 50 years old. Despite a lifetime of stardom and millions earned, his estate was valued at just $10,000, a shocking sum for one of Hollywood's brightest leading men. Number 5. Veronica Lake, peekaboo starlet turned waitress. In the 1940s, no hairstyle was more imitated than Veronica Lake's iconic peekaboo wave. With her mysterious cascade of blonde hair falling over one eye, she became a symbol of sultry allure and an emblem of wartime Hollywood. Starring in films like Sullivan's Travels, 1941, and This Gun for Hire, 1942, Lake seemed to have everything: fame, money, and a place among the brightest stars of Paramount Pictures. But Hollywood's love affair with Veronica was painfully short-lived, and her fall from grace was as dramatic as her rise. Lake's career began unraveling after World War II. The peekaboo hairstyle that had made her famous was even blamed by officials for causing accidents among female factory workers who tried to copy it while operating machinery. Though exaggerated, the publicity hurt her image. By the late 1940s, her stardom waned as she struggled with typecasting, alcoholism, and a reputation for being difficult on set. The studios, always eager for the next young sensation, turned their attention elsewhere. Financial troubles soon consumed her. Failed marriages drained her income through legal fees and settlements. Years of heavy drinking worsened her mental health and led to erratic behavior. In 1951, Veronica Lake filed for bankruptcy, her once lavish lifestyle replaced by mounting debts and few acting offers. By the 1960s, Lake had faded so far from the spotlight that most fans assumed she was gone altogether. In reality, she was working as a cocktail waitress and hostess in a New York hotel, serving drinks to customers who often failed to recognize that the woman behind the bar had once been Hollywood royalty. Later, she published a candid memoir, Veronica, which revealed her bitterness toward the industry that had abandoned her. Her final years were marked by illness and poverty. On July 7, 1973, at only 50 years old, Veronica Lake died from hepatitis and kidney failure in a Vermont hospital. Her estate consisted of little more than a small bank account and personal belongings. The woman who had been immortalized as the peekaboo girl ended her life in obscurity. Veronica Lake's story is a haunting reminder that Hollywood's spotlight burns bright, but rarely for long. Number 6. Fatty Arbuckle, millionaire, silenced by scandal. In the silent era of Hollywood, few stars shone brighter than Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. With his cherubic face, remarkable agility, and comedic timing, Arbuckle was one of the first true movie superstars. By 1920, he was earning over $1 million a year, an unheard-of fortune at the time, making him one of the highest-paid entertainers in the world. His films drew massive audiences, and studios considered him a cornerstone of the new motion picture empire. But in a single night, scandal would erase everything he had built. In September 1921, Arbuckle hosted a party at San Francisco's St. Francis Hotel. When young actress Virginia Rapp fell ill and later died, whispers of impropriety spiraled into a sensational trial. Arbuckle was accused of rape and manslaughter, and though he was acquitted after 3 trials, the damage was irreversible. The public, whipped into outrage by tabloid headlines, never forgave him. Hollywood, terrified of boycotts, pulled his films from circulation and effectively blacklisted him. The legal ordeal drained his fortune. Arbuckle reportedly spent over $700,000 on lawyers, investigators, and mounting fees, leaving his bank accounts nearly empty. Studios that once courted him now refused to answer his calls. He attempted to stage a comeback under the pseudonym William Goodrich, directing short comedies, but the glory and wealth of his early years were gone forever. By the time he died of a heart attack on June 29, 1933, at just 46 years old, Roscoe Arbuckle was living modestly, his assets nearly depleted. He left behind little for his widow, a stark contrast to the mansions and millions that once defined his life. Arbuckle's story remains one of the most tragic cautionary tales in Hollywood history. A man at the pinnacle of fame and fortune, reduced to obscurity and financial ruin by scandal and a merciless press. Though history has since re-examined the case with more sympathy, Arbuckle himself never recovered. He was a millionaire, silenced not by failure of talent, but by the unforgiving weight of reputation and rumor. Number 7. Dorothy Dandridge, Hollywood trailblazer with 24 cents to her name. She was elegance personified, a luminous singer and actress who broke barriers in an industry built on exclusion. Dorothy Dandridge's performance in Carmen Jones, 1954, made her the first African-American woman ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, a historic achievement that seemed to promise a bright future. Yet behind the applause and trailblazing success, Dorothy's life spiraled into heartbreak and financial collapse, ending in shocking poverty. Despite her undeniable talent, Hollywood was reluctant to let her shine. Roles for black actresses were scarce, and when they came, they were often demeaning stereotypes. Dorothy fought to avoid them, but turning down work meant fewer opportunities to earn a steady income. Racism not only limited her career, but also blocked her access to the kind of lucrative contracts her white contemporaries enjoyed. Adding to the weight were disastrous financial decisions. Mismanagement by advisors left her vulnerable, while years of unpaid taxes to the IRS mounted into crushing debt. Failed investments drained her small savings. Divorce settlements and legal battles compounded the losses. By 1963, Dandridge was forced to file for bankruptcy, admitting debts of over $150,000, a staggering sum for someone once at the pinnacle of Hollywood prestige. Her personal life mirrored the turmoil of her finances. A failed marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas left her emotionally scarred and financially strained, while her responsibilities as a single mother added further stress. In her later years, the roles had dried up completely, and the star who once stood as a beacon of possibility was living in obscurity, desperately trying to make ends meet. On September 8, 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her modest West Hollywood apartment at just 42 years old. Her bank account held only 24 cents. Officially ruled an accidental overdose of antidepressants, her passing shocked those who remembered her as the dazzling woman who once embodied Hollywood glamour. Number 8. Bela Lugosi, Dracula, died in debt. Few images in cinema are as enduring as Bela Lugosi's piercing stare and hypnotic voice in Dracula, 1931. With a single role, Lugosi became the face of horror, his name forever tied to the vampire count. For audiences, he was immortal. But behind the screen, the actor was mortal in the harshest sense, struggling with typecasting, chronic illness, addiction, and mounting financial ruin. After Dracula's enormous success, Lugosi found himself trapped. Hollywood could not see past his Transylvanian accent or Gothic aura. While contemporaries like Boris Karloff reinvented themselves, Lugosi was relegated to endless horror roles, many in low-budget productions that paid only a fraction of what he deserved. Each check disappeared quickly, and his attempts to break into more serious work were rebuffed. Chronic pain from sciatica drove Lugosi to use morphine and methadone, substances that soon turned into full-fledged addictions. Work became harder to secure, and studios hesitated to insure him. By 1955, Lugosi's debts had mounted so high that he filed for bankruptcy, declaring assets of just $1,900 against debts of $3,500. A humiliating fall for one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars. His final years were marked by desperation. He took roles in films many regarded as beneath his talent, including the notorious Plan 9 from Outer Space by cult director Ed Wood. Audiences laughed, but for Lugosi, it was survival. He continued acting even as his health declined, relying on small fees to cover basic living expenses. On August 16, 1956, Bela Lugosi died of a heart attack at the age of 73. His estate was so depleted that he left behind virtually nothing of value. In a poignant twist, it was Frank Sinatra, a fan who admired Lugosi's legacy, who quietly paid for the actor's funeral costs. Number 9. Marie Prevost, silent star devoured by obscurity. In the roaring 1920s, Marie Prevost was the very image of Hollywood vitality. With her bright eyes and lively spirit, she starred in hits like The Marriage Circle, 1924, and Kiss Me Again, 1925. Audiences adored her as one of the silent screen's most charming ingenues, and Paramount promoted her as a radiant successor to the great flappers of the jazz age. Yet, when the sound revolution swept through Hollywood, Marie's world crumbled almost overnight. The arrival of talkies in the late 1920s proved disastrous for many silent stars, and Prevost was among the casualties. Her voice, high-pitched and ill-suited to the new medium, made casting directors hesitant. Offers dwindled, and within a few years, the once celebrated actress was nearly forgotten. Unable to reclaim her footing, she slipped into obscurity while watching contemporaries reinvent themselves. Struggling with the loss of fame, Marie turned to alcohol as a way to dull her despair. What began as occasional drinking escalated into full-blown alcoholism, eroding both her health and her reputation. Directors avoided hiring her, not just for her fading star power, but for her growing unreliability. Without steady work, she found herself living in small, dilapidated apartments, far removed from the glamorous mansions of Hollywood's elite. Her decline was heartbreaking. Malnourished and increasingly isolated, Marie reportedly struggled to afford basic necessities. The woman who once walked red carpets was reduced to surviving on scraps, her phone rarely ringing with offers or calls from friends. On January 21, 1937, at only 38 years old, Marie Prevost was found dead in her Los Angeles apartment. The cause, acute alcoholism and severe malnutrition. Reports revealed she had just $300 to her name. Prevost's lonely end shocked the few in Hollywood who still remembered her. Her life served as a grim parable for the speed with which the industry could discard its stars. One decade, she was the embodiment of Hollywood charm. The next, she was a forgotten figure, consumed by obscurity and addiction. Number 10. Mabel Normand, comedic queen tarnished by scandal. In the earliest days of Hollywood, before the era of sound and color, Mabel Normand reigned as the queen of comedy. With her mischievous sparkle and impeccable timing, she was one of the first true screen comedians. Starring alongside Charlie Chaplin and Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, she charmed audiences with films like Mabel's Strange Predicament, 1914, where Chaplin first donned the tramp costume. More than just a performer, she was also a pioneering director, a rarity for women. In the 1910s, for a time, Mabel stood at the very heart of Hollywood's silent empire, but her bright star dimmed under the shadow of scandal. In 1922, Mabel was caught in the fallout of one of Hollywood's most infamous mysteries, the unsolved murder of director William Desmond Taylor. Although she was never a suspect, her close friendship with Taylor meant her name splashed across lurid headlines. The relentless scrutiny tarnished her reputation and made studios hesitant to hire her. In an era when image was everything, the damage was irreparable. Compounding the blow was her failing health. Mabel suffered from tuberculosis, a devastating disease in the early 20th century. Frequent hospitalizations and costly treatments drained her finances, while her absence from the screen left her with fewer opportunities to earn. The vivacious woman who once lit up the screen grew frailer with each passing year. Her once promising career reduced to a faint memory. By the late 1920s, she was living far from the glittering lights of the studio lots. She spent her last years in sanitariums, struggling not only with her illness, but also with the knowledge that Hollywood had moved on without her. On February 23, 1930, at just 37 years old, Mabel Normand died, her fortune long gone, and her reputation still clouded by scandal. Her story is a poignant paradox. A woman who helped shape early cinema, remembered less for her brilliance than for the controversies that clung to her name. Mabel Normand was once comedy's brightest light, yet she died in the shadows. A tragic reminder of how swiftly Hollywood discards even its most dazzling pioneers. Number 11. John Garfield, blacklisted rebel, broken by politics. John Garfield was the very definition of raw talent. With his brooding intensity and working-class authenticity, he electrified audiences in films like Body and Soul, 1947, and The Postman Always Rings Twice, 1946. He wasn't just a matinee idol, he was one of the first American actors to bring method-style realism to the screen, paving the way for Brando, Clift, and later James Dean. For a brief moment in the 1940s, Garfield stood on the cusp of Hollywood immortality, but politics, not talent, would destroy him. The late 1940s brought the Red Scare, and with it, the House Un-American Activities Committee, Tweet THUAC. Like many actors, Garfield supported liberal causes and lent his name to progressive organizations during the Depression and wartime years. Those associations made him a target. Summoned before HUAC in 1951, Garfield denied any communist ties, but refused to name names. In an atmosphere of fear, that refusal was enough to ruin him. Practically overnight, studios severed ties. Once a bankable star, Garfield found himself unemployable, blacklisted by an industry terrified of political backlash. The stress of financial collapse weighed heavily. Legal fees mounted, scripts dried up, and the wealth he had built in a decade of stardom dwindled to nothing. Friends later recalled that the once fiery and passionate actor seemed broken, his spirit crushed by betrayal from the very system he had helped sustain. His personal life suffered alongside his career. Strained relationships, constant surveillance, and the humiliation of public suspicion took a toll on his health. Garfield's heart, weakened by years of smoking and stress, could not endure the pressure. On May 21, 1952, Garfield died of a heart attack in a New York apartment at just 39 years old. Though not destitute, his career and finances had been stripped bare, his future stolen by politics. John Garfield's death stands as one of the blacklist's cruelest casualties. He had the talent to redefine Hollywood acting for a generation, but fear and hysteria made him a pariah. In the end, it wasn't box office decline or scandal that killed him. It was the weight of silence and suspicion. Number 12. Bud Abbott, half of a duo left with nothing. For 2 decades, Bud Abbott was one half of the most famous comedy team in America. Alongside Lou Costello, he created routines that became etched into popular culture. None more iconic than Who's on First? Audiences roared with laughter, and the duo's films in the 1940s made Universal Studios millions. At their peak, Abbott and Costello were earning more than the President of the United States. Their names guaranteed to pack theaters. But behind the laughter was a financial tragedy that would leave Bud Abbott nearly destitute. During World War II, Abbott and Costello raised an astonishing $85 million in war bonds through their performances, a patriotic gesture that won them national acclaim. Yet, the gesture also triggered financial trouble. The IRS disallowed hundreds of thousands of dollars in deductions they claimed as expenses related to their bond tours. That ruling set off years of battles with the tax agency. As Lou Costello's health declined and he passed away in 1959, Abbott attempted to continue solo performances, but the chemistry of the duo was irreplaceable. His own health also suffered. He battled epilepsy and struggled to find steady work. Meanwhile, the IRS seized his home to satisfy back taxes. The man who once lived in Hollywood mansions was forced into a small apartment with little more than basic furniture. In desperation, Bud Abbott made televised appeals for financial help, hoping that fans who had once adored him might extend generosity. Some answered, but it was never enough to restore stability. He continued to voice Abbott in animated versions of Abbott and Costello, but the paychecks were modest compared to his earlier fortunes. On April 24, 1974, Abbott died at the age of 78. He left behind virtually nothing. Even his funeral expenses strained those closest to him. The tragedy of Bud Abbott's story lies in its cruel irony. A man who gave millions the gift of laughter, who helped define comedy for generations, spent his final years begging for financial relief. His fall from the pinnacle of show business to near poverty underscores Hollywood's harshest truth. Fame fades, but debts do not. Number 13. Buster Keaton. The great stone face lived small. In the 1920s, Buster Keaton was a marvel of the silver screen. The great stone face, whose deadpan expression and daring stunts redefined film comedy. With masterpieces like The General, 1926, and Sherlock Jr., 1924, he blended slapstick with technical brilliance, creating works that critics now hail as some of the greatest films ever made. Audiences adored him, studios courted him, and by the mid-1920s, he was one of the highest-paid stars in Hollywood. Yet by the end of his life, Keaton was living modestly, his fortune drained by divorce, addiction, and the loss of creative control. The turning point came in 1928, when Keaton signed with MGM. The studio system stripped him of the independence that had fueled his genius. Scripts were chosen for him. His improvisational style was curtailed, and the films suffered. Keaton felt stifled, and as his artistic freedom evaporated, so too did his box office draw. By the early 1930s, his career was in decline. Personal troubles compounded the professional blow. His divorce from actress Natalie Talmadge in 1932 proved ruinous. Costly alimony payments and legal fees cut deeply into his earnings. Struggling to cope, Keaton turned increasingly to alcohol, a battle that eroded his health and reputation. Offers dwindled, and by the mid-1930s, he was working as a gag writer for other comedians, earning a fraction of his former salary. Though he eventually remarried and achieved sobriety, Keaton never regained his financial footing. He staged a quiet comeback in the 1950s, appearing on television and in small film roles. But the pay was modest compared to his glory days. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not die destitute. But the man who once commanded millions in box office receipts spent his final years in relative simplicity, far from the lavish life he had once enjoyed. On February 1, 1966, Keaton died of lung cancer at the age of 70. He left behind a modest estate, but his true legacy was not financial. Instead, it was his unmatched contribution to cinema. A reminder that genius may outlive fortune, but Hollywood rarely rewards both. Number 14. Billie Holiday, a voice of gold, dying in handcuffs. Her voice was velvet and heartbreak, carrying pain and beauty in every note. Billie Holiday, known as Lady Day, transformed American music with haunting songs like Strange Fruit and God Bless the Child. She rose from poverty to become one of the greatest jazz singers of all time, filling nightclubs and concert halls with audiences eager to hear her sorrowful, soulful phrasing. Yet even at the height of her fame, racism, addiction, and financial exploitation conspired to rob her of both dignity and fortune. Holiday's troubles began early. Growing up in poverty, she fought her way into Harlem's jazz clubs, where her talent quickly caught the attention of band leaders like Count Basie and Artie Shaw. But behind the spotlight, she faced relentless discrimination. Clubs barred her from front entrances, and hotels refused her rooms. Financially, she was often underpaid compared to her white counterparts, leaving her earnings far below what her fame deserved. Addiction soon became her undoing. Struggling with heroin and alcohol dependency, Holiday endured arrests and prison sentences that further damaged her career. The FBI relentlessly pursued her, targeting her in high-profile drug cases. Promoters hesitated to hire her, and venues lost licenses if they allowed her to perform. By the 1950s, the combination of legal troubles, racism, and lost contracts had left her finances in shambles. Her final years were a tragic unraveling. In 1959, Holiday was admitted to a New York hospital, suffering from cirrhosis and heart failure. As she lay dying, federal agents handcuffed her to her hospital bed, accusing her of possessing heroin. She had just $750 in her bank account. Fans sent flowers, but no fortune remained for her care. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died at only 44 years old, her once golden voice silenced by the very demons she had sung about with such aching honesty. Billie Holiday's story is one of America's cruelest contradictions. A woman who gave the world music of timeless beauty, but who herself was left broken, criminalized, and impoverished. Her voice lives forever, even if the system ensured she left this world with almost nothing. Number 15. Frances Farmer. Studio gaslighting and a broken spirit. Frances Farmer was once hailed as one of Hollywood's most promising young actresses. With her striking beauty and powerful performances in films like Come and Get It, 1936, and Son of Fury, 1942, she seemed destined for greatness. Critics compared her intensity to that of Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn, and Paramount billed her as a star to watch. Yet Farmer was never content to play the studio system's game. Fiercely independent, she challenged authority, and in an era of rigid control, that defiance came at a terrible cost. Her troubles began when she rejected the publicity machine. Frances publicly criticized the shallow roles offered to women and railed against the exploitation of actors. Studios branded her difficult, and contracts dried up. By the early 1940s, personal struggles compounded her professional woes. Arrests for drunk driving and disorderly conduct tarnished her reputation, and gossip columnists painted her as unstable. Behind the headlines lay a woman grappling with undiagnosed mental illness. In 1943, after a highly publicized courtroom breakdown, Frances was committed to a series of psychiatric hospitals. What followed was nearly 3 decades of institutionalization. Reports claim she endured brutal treatments, including insulin shock therapy, psychiatric abuse, and even rumors of lobotomy. Whether exaggerated or not, the image of Frances Farmer as a victim of medical cruelty became a powerful symbol of Hollywood's abandonment. Her finances evaporated during these years. Once considered a rising star with wealth on the horizon, she lost everything to hospital bills, legal fees, and the simple fact that she could no longer work. By the time she was released in the 1950s, she was a forgotten woman, forced to take odd jobs far from the cameras that once celebrated her. In the 1970s, she made a modest return on television, but the comeback was fleeting. On August 1, 1970, Frances Farmer died of esophageal cancer at just 56 years old. She left behind little more than the fragments of a life Hollywood had chewed up and discarded. Number 16. Joe Louis, heavyweight champion. Hounded by taxes, Joe Louis was more than a boxer. He was an American icon. Known as the Brown Bomber, he reigned as heavyweight champion from 1937 to 1949, a record run that made him a national hero. His victories carried weight far beyond the ring. When he knocked out Max Schmeling in 1938, the win was hailed as a symbolic triumph over Nazi ideology. In those years, Joe Louis stood shoulder to shoulder with Hollywood stars, appearing in films, at glamorous Las Vegas venues, and rubbing elbows with the Rat Pack. But the fortune he earned in prize money and endorsements would be stripped away, leaving him bankrupt and humiliated. At his peak, Louis earned millions, yet poor financial advice and disastrous tax management sealed his fate. During World War II, he donated much of his fight purses to military relief funds and bought war bonds, often at the urging of the government. The patriotic gestures thrilled the public, but backfired financially. The IRS ruled that taxes were still owed on his donated earnings, saddling him with a staggering bill that grew with interest and penalties. By the 1950s, Louis was fighting not for glory, but for survival. Long past his prime, he returned to the ring simply to pay off debts. Later, he worked as a greeter at Las Vegas casinos, shaking hands with tourists who remembered his greatness, but unaware that the job was a desperate attempt to stay afloat. His health began to fail in the 1970s. Years of punishment in the ring, combined with stress and financial strain, left him frail. When he died of cardiac arrest on April 12, 1981, at the age of 66, Joe Louis was deeply in debt. It was former rival Max Schmeling, once the man he had defeated in the ring, who quietly helped pay for Louis's funeral. Number 17. Hedy Lamarr. Inventor ignored. Beauty forgotten. In the 1930s and 1940s, Hedy Lamarr was billed as the most beautiful woman in the world. With her luminous dark hair, dazzling features, and sultry screen presence, she captivated audiences in films like Algiers, 1938, and Samson and Delilah, 1949. She lived the life of a glamorous Hollywood starlet, lavish homes, expensive jewels, and international fame. But beneath the glitter, Lamarr's life was far more complicated. She was not only an actress, but a brilliant inventor whose ideas were dismissed, and a woman whose fortune and reputation slowly crumbled. Lamarr's true genius appeared during World War II, when she co-developed a frequency-hopping communication system intended to prevent torpedo signals from being jammed. The technology, ignored in her lifetime, later became the foundation for modern Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Yet Hollywood executives and the U.S. Navy brushed her aside, preferring to promote her beauty rather than her intellect. Instead of recognition or royalties, Lamarr was told to entertain troops and sell war bonds. Financially, her wealth dwindled after a string of failed marriages, poor investments, and extravagant spending. By the 1950s and 1960s, her career had cooled, and she struggled to find roles beyond caricatures of her former beauty. Alone and desperate for money, Lamarr drifted into scandal. In 1966, she was arrested for shoplifting in Los Angeles, an incident that turned the once celebrated star into tabloid fodder. Her later years were marked by reclusion. Lamarr withdrew from public life, rarely appearing in person. She lived quietly in modest apartments in Florida, relying on dwindling savings and occasional settlements. The woman who once epitomized Hollywood glamour became a ghost of the industry, remembered only in old films and scandal sheets. On January 19, 2000, Lamarr died at 85 in near obscurity. Though not entirely destitute, she had little to show for a career that once promised riches and fame. Only after her death did the world recognize her as a pioneering inventor whose brilliance had been ignored. Hollywood's presence was glamorous, the lives of our stars full of luxury, yet behind it lay shadows of debt, despair, and forgotten dreams. These stars gave us memories that outlived their fortunes. Share your thoughts below, and if you want more untold stories from Hollywood's past, be sure to like, subscribe, and join us again.